Hey, Geekscapists, welcome to a brand new Geekscape podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan London. And like I say every week, if this is your first Geekscape, strap yourselves in for some comic book talk, movies, video games, TV, everything that's fit to print under the pop culture umbrella. I went to a comic convention this past weekend. Can't wait to tell you about that. Kind of got me excited for seeing you all at San Diego Comic Con this summer. Maybe I will see you before then. Maybe I'll see you maybe down in Orange County for WonderCon. That'd be cool. I submitted some panels if WonderCon accepts them. Maybe we'll have some cool panels. We had a blast at LA Comic Con. Y'all definitely benefited from that. Some of those LA Comic Con panels are up on the feed right now in case you weren't there. I enjoy the LeVar Burton one. You know what's funny is I look at the feed and see, hey, what are the Geekscapists downloading? Like, what podcasts are they downloading? The Amy Jo Johnson conversation with me from LA Comic Con, you know, Power Ranger, original Pink Ranger, Amy Jo Johnson. That had like a spike when I posted it, and then it tapered off. People started listening to other things. Christmas happened, the new year. And then in the past 2 weeks or so, I don't know who shared it. I don't know what Power Ranger fan group or whatever found it, but people started discovering the Amy Jo Johnson interview, and it started picking up numbers. It's like, why even record a new Geekscape at this point? Like, people are still listening to the old ones, but we're here every week for you folks to bring you some pop culture goodness. Last week was fun. How much fun was Samba? I meant everything I said about loving Our Flag Means Death. And I got to tell you, he did come to the Homeward Bound screening that we did on Saturday that we promoted on the show last week. That was fun. That was a blast. We had the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood almost at full capacity. I'll admit it right here. I know my friend Ben Stahl is in the film Homeward Bound. I'd never seen it. What a BSer I turned out to be. I've never seen Homeward Bound, and neither had Heidi. Oh, she said her sister had seen it, and Heidi had seen pieces of it, but I hadn't seen a lick of Homeward Bound. I just knew it. But when Homeward Bound hit theaters, 1993, I believe, I was like 14 years old. I just wanted to watch like True Lies again and like action stuff or something nerdy. And it was for kids that were a little younger than me, but a ton of people in the 90s grew up with Homeward Bound. And this theater was, I'm going to say, raucous. The movie works. It was so much fun talking to the director, Dwayne, and Jeffrey, the producer, who also worked on Body Heat. And that was awesome. I got to talk to him about ADing Body Heat, which is one of my favorite noir films. And of course, you know who plays the dad in Homeward Bound? Robert Hayes. That Stryker from Airplane. So I'm sitting there in the green room, and okay, I glanced at the IMDb. I'd seen some of the emails going back and forth with the cast and crew about organizing the panel and all this. Really, I'm just like, okay, let's clean out the questions. Let's figure this all out. I hadn't really put names to faces yet. And then in walks Stryker from Airplane, Robert Hayes himself. And I love Airplane. I think it's hilarious. And I got to spend the whole evening with Robert Hayes, which is cool. I'll tell you this, Geekscapists. Benj is working on acquiring the audio, but that's a Disney theater, Disney recording maybe. I don't know how the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, but if we can get the audio from the Homeward Bound panel, is that something you guys would even be interested in? Most of the audience is younger than me, so maybe you grew up with Homeward Bound. Maybe I'll put it on the feed if I can acquire it. But I think that was fun. I had a blast. I had an absolute blast. And the movie's good. I saw Homeward Bound for the first time, and it holds up. I have no memory of it, but it holds up. And we had a blast. And it was cool. And some ex-Geekscape guests were there, like Ben Begley and people like that. So it was really, really fun. I then on Sunday went to the Pasadena Comic Con, and I wasn't expecting a whole lot. No offense, but it's Pasadena Comic Con. It feels like a smaller convention. It's not San Diego. What a snob did I turn out to be? If it's not New York Comic Con or San Diego Comic Con or WonderCon or any of these major ones, if it's not Fan Expo, count me out. No, I think I'm going to tell you guys the same advice I give filmmakers who think about film festivals. Some of the smaller film festivals and some of the smaller conventions are where you can really develop some amazing relationships. If you're a creator, and I have a fantastic creator on the show, right now, coming up, my buddy Kraig Rasmussen. He's a indie comic creator. He does some amazing sci-fi comics, and that's where you develop the relationships. You're clearly not going to go to San Diego Comic Con and meet Robert Downey Jr. I mean, you might run into him, but chances are you're not. You will meet Kraig Rasmussen. We will have some of these people signing at the Geekscape booth. A lot of you have met some amazing people at the Geekscape booth or at their booths. San Diego is great, but if you go to a place like Pasadena Comic Con, or there's a great one in like the Inland Empire here in California, I'm sure that there's tons of them where you live. Some of these regional cons are where you really can meet some amazing creators. They don't get the same exposure that the big wigs do. And the same thing goes for film festivals. You're an indie filmmaker and you have a short film. It's not always all about the Sundance. It's not always about getting into Tribeca, right? Or South by Southwest, which I think South by Southwest only accepts like under 100 short films. It's not a lot for a film festival its size. But I will tell you this guy right here, Jonathan London, back in the day, I had a short film play the Ojai Film Festival. And you may be like, Ojai Film Festival? Yeah, it's an affluent kind of town just north of Los Angeles, about an hour and a half north of Los Angeles in Ojai. Beautiful, beautiful town. Not only did the movie play really well, my short film, it won some awards. I walked out of there with $1,000 on a short film I think I only spent $4,000 on. And this is the coolest part of it. I met Sergio Aragonés, who like draws Gru, like classic Mad Magazine artist who I grew up worshiping. And I don't know if you read Gru. It's kind of like the Conan cartoon. It's really funny. Sergio Aragonés lives in Ojai, and he was being honored with an award. And because the film festival was so small, I could just walk up to him. It was great. So I had a blast at Pasadena Comic Con. Geekscape related. The $2 late fee guys did some panels. I had a ton of fun, saw some Geekscape friends, and I bought maybe a few too many old Avengers comics from the 70s, but they were $2 each, so I had to. And I love 70s Avengers comics because it's when the good stuff happened. That's all now turning into movies. It was really what I needed. It was fun. It was a good day to be a nerd. All right, Geekscapists, I cannot wait to introduce you to Kraig. Let's get this show started. I love you all. Thank you for choosing Geekscape to be your entertainment for the next, let's put 45 minutes on the clock, maybe an hour. Let's go. Hello, Geekscapists. Give me a moment. I discovered that my pen is out of ink, and this is one of my favorite pens. I'm just kidding. Don't give me a moment. I can wing it just like I did. But I'd written down some notes. I was going to write down some more notes. But the reason I don't want to get rid of this pen is check this pen out for you video viewers watching it on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, or maybe on LinkedIn. You're dropping some resumes. We're live on all those platforms. We're free all the time. So if you're listening, I'm just going to describe this pen real quick. This pen's cool. It has a bubble balance on there. So I don't know if you want to like maybe hang a portrait or something or a picture on your wall. There's got a bubble balance. It also has a ruler. So you can measure in inches and centimeters. And I think it's got a couple of things. This is like a go-go gadget pen. And I hope I can just replace the ink in it with something because I do not want to replace this pen. It's really cool. It has an eraser on it. I don't know if it erases ink. Let's see. I don't know. Whatever. Speaking of like, rest in peace, pen. Speaking of LA Comic Con, like I did in the intro, we had Joe Dante on $2 late fee, one of the Geekscape podcasts, and that interview, which I recorded, and I'm so glad I recorded it and didn't botch it. That interview is fantastic. Joe shares so many amazing stories, from making Gremlins to making The Burbs and all those amazing 80s films, and then on to the 90s. And he's got some great Gremlins 2 stories. It's available now on the $2 late fee feed. So get on over to the $2 late fee feed after you listen to this show and download the Joe Dante episode. It's an hour of fantastic stories from Joe Dante making his movies and, you know, his career. So that was cool, and I had to tell you about it. All right, now it's time to tell you about my good friend Kraig. Kraig makes comics. You can go visit him over at monkeygong.com. If you're maybe sitting with one ear listening to this podcast at your desk while ignoring your work, go ahead and throw up a tab. You're already slacking off. Throw up a tab on your computer and go to monkeygong.com and check out some of Kraig's work. While I talk to Kraig, come on in here. Say hello to all the procrastinators and people who should be doing their work, but they're listening to you on Geekscape.
We'll call them last-minute workers. Hello, last-minute workers. I am one of you. I can completely relate.
Are you really?
The pressure's
because,
on.
I mean, I see this
Monkeygong.
I see this monkeygong.com, and I love indie comics. I'm kind of flirting right now with the idea of getting back into indie comics. I met some people yesterday at the Pasadena convention about maybe doing lettering or inking and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, how would I put this project together? But you do it all the time. And Geekscape the website is monkeygong, like bang a gong, .com. And talk to me, because you're very prolific for somebody who is what was it, like last minute employee? What did you call him?
Yeah. I mean, that's the nice way of saying procrastinator. I mean, you know, look, we've all had our moments with deep procrastination, and then there's subtle, lighter procrastination. And like, I'm in the last 4 days of a deadline on something that I'm not self-publishing right this second. So I can definitely, you know, wear that patch proudly on my shoulder that I am sometimes a bit of a procrastinator, but it's only because I am hustling all this other stuff and doing my own self-publishing. And on that, I guess I'm getting a lot more diligent than I have been in the past.
And Kraig, you draw, ink. Do you ink as well? But you definitely write and draw your comics. You ink as well. You're like a one person shop. Do you do the lettering on your books?
I do. I could probably be better at it, and I could probably hire somebody to do it, but I do it. I know how to do it. So,
well, Kraig, where did you come from? Like, where did you grow up? Because you and I, we were trying to figure out before the show how we know each other. I know that you had a story in one of Chris Mancini's publications, and our good buddy Fernando Pinto, he did the Geekscape logo. He did the Geek Drum logo before that. Like, this is Fernando and Fernando's work, and Fernando did work for Chris Mancini. And I look up and I'm reading your bio and I see one of Chris's books there. Is that how we met? We're trying to figure out how we met, Geekscape.
I don't know, man. I honestly cannot. Like, I'm wondering if it had something to do with one of the Podfests. Did you go to one of those when Chris put those on with Graham?
I did. I hosted a podcast at one of those, but I'm
Could that have been it? Maybe that was where we actually met in person, and maybe Chris was like, "Hey, you guys are both geeks. Like, you should, you know."
If you're going to podcast, if you're going to a thing called Podfest, he could have said that about anybody in the room.
Maybe there is like the super cool comedy set that also attends that event, or attended that event. But you know what I mean?
Listen,
you know what I mean. There's
being a comedy snob doesn't make you cool.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's you know what I'm talking about. They know who they are.
I do. And who's turning their noses up now? Their podcasts are all done. I'm kidding. I was on the last Comedy Film Nerds podcast. We did it was live at the Dynasty Typewriter. Chris had me over in Graham Elwood, and I was actually on that show. We were on stage. Heidi played a little song. It was amazing. She had a little ukulele and I sang a song. Geekscapists, I was going to tell you to go find that episode, but remember, I sing a song. That's the final Comedy Film Nerds. You probably don't want to listen to it.
It's the reason to wait till the end of this episode, at least, to check it out. Just to, it's not a deterrent. It's just y'all
are going to go listen to our late fee and go listen to Joe Dante tell amazing stories. Well, Kraig, knowing that, I think you, knowing how long, like not knowing how long I've known you, it was a couple months ago that you said, "Hey, I've got this Zoop, crowdfund campaign going for what it is. Geekscape. It's a collection of Kraig's books, well, stories for the most part, but he's calling it Odds and Ends. He's done 2 books of it, and he's doing a crowdfund using Zoop, and we've talked about with two creators who use Zoop over at zoop.gg. And what he's doing is he's raising money to get you copies of Odds and Ends. And this Odds and Ends book, this isn't like your full stories. These are what you say they are, Odds and Ends, short stories. What is this book? These two books?
Yeah, I mean, there is one full-length comic book in it. It's a time travel comic, and that's something that I'm not going to be drawing the actual graphic novel right away for multiple reasons, not important. Other projects definitely play into that. But hey, let me go down a tangent you guys don't need to hear. But
yeah, that's the host job.
Yeah, exactly. I still have it in my blood. You do a few podcasts and suddenly you're screwed on the tangent front. The thing is that I ended up with a lot of, they're not leftovers. They're things that I think were fairly successful in their time. Some things I did for art school, some things I did as TV show or movie pitch comics. And I just sort of ended up with that plus some personal work, some early experiments in webcomics and things like that. Single pages that I did literally just to make myself laugh, or at a cartoonist conspiracy meeting, which I used to be involved with. The San Francisco Cartoonist Conspiracy. It was a great bi-monthly jam group where cartoonists just came to a coffee shop, took it over for the whole evening, and we came up with a project on the spot. It's kind of like improv comics, and you just sit down, you draw the first panel on a page, hand that page off to the next person. They draw the next panel, or everybody draws their own page. So you end up with a book, and it's all based on the same concept, or theme, or just line of dialogue. Sometimes, like this line of dialogue has to be on the page, go to town. And so I just ended up with
48-hour film contest, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, we even we even did a 24-hour comic with a bunch of us involved. That partially took place in my apartment, which my neighbors really loved so much. But yeah, no, I mean, I just ended up, I moved on for one reason or another, and started to focus on bigger projects, did some paid work, whatever. So I just had stuff that would get pushed to the side. It wasn't invalid or anything like that. It just was the stuff that was gathering dust, and I thought was good stuff. Like in every case, it delivers the story that I was trying to deliver, whether it's 4 pages, 1 page, or even 15 pages. And now I have such an array that I have 200 pages of these different stories, and each of them represents a story. Like each page, if it's a single page, it has enough atmosphere and story happening that I kind of feel confident putting it into a mixed anthology. And, when I got to the point that I've been working at in the last year or so, where my brand is very clear to me more than it ever has been, and I'm feeling pretty successful with the work I'm doing, and I kind of have a vision that I'm pursuing and enjoying a lot, I looked back at this stuff and I was like, it was always there. Like the brand was always there. It's like you kind of don't know your voice until you have used it a lot. And then you look back and you're like, I guess I did know my voice. I just didn't intellectualize my voice as an artist at the time. Like I was still so experimental and still learning and, stretching. I mean, a lot of times I would switch gears just because I needed to stretch and learn to draw stuff I'd never drawn before. Right. So ultimately that just ended up with a nice collection of different stories. And, now it's kind of an exciting visual collection, and I'm this is in the Zoop campaign, so I don't want to repeat too much of it, but I'm actually taking the oldest stuff and a couple of things that were still in pencil, luckily, and I'm absolutely upgrading the art. So I'm going in with whiteout, I'm going in with new ink. I'm not redrawing anything, so I'm trying to keep the spirit of each thing without changing it, but I'm not afraid to be like, that's a terrible hand, it needs to go, and I gotta put in a hand, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be pretty cool because I'm really buttering it up so that it's an awesome 2-volume, 200-page set, and that all has like a chronological arc to it, a little bit of a narrative, at least in like similar motifs and genres and things like that. So yeah, I think it's exciting.
And Geekscape is, again, if you go over to monkeygong.com, you can there's a link to the Zoop campaign. I'm just going to glance at it real quick. I won't bring it up on the screen. Geekscape is listening, but you've got 17 days as of the Monday that we're recording this one. You're raising $6,000. You're above it, but I'm guessing at this point we're talking about incentives. We're just selling issues of the book, and Geekscape is to get a PDF version of the book is just $20, and that'll be a digital PDF version of the book. If you actually want to hold it, which I love, I gotta hold my comics. I gotta have the tactile feel, and I just love I love laying in bed at night and not having a screen, just having comics. $50 will get you the physical book. And for a 200-page book, these are 2 softcover books, 100 pages each, and they're chock full of some really cool, interesting artwork and stories. Then you are in business. So 50 and you get to go to bed and like read it. And sometimes Heidi, sometimes I wake up at like 4 a.m. and I'll just mutter to Heidi, be like, can I read? Because yeah, I mean, the most profound sleep you're gonna get is that sleep like right before your alarm goes off. And I know that if I read a little bit, I'll get sleepy again, and then the alarm will go off, and I'll have to like, come out of a coma. But I like to read at like 3-4 a.m. in bed. Just grab a comic off the bedside table and read, because my brain's it's 3 or 4 a.m. My brain doesn't work. I can read comics though. Kraig, where are you from, dude?
I'm a Northern California kid. I grew up in
so
Sacramento and San Francisco. So,
and so you gravitated to San Francisco in that kind of art scene. Would you say the art scene there, is it like an alternative art scene, magazine, zine kind of scene, and that kind of influenced your sci-fi artwork? Like, why not do some superhero stuff or some of the traditional stuff that you sometimes see in Artist Alley, right? Where people are doing commissions on really popular characters like Batman and Superman. They're doing commissions on comic book characters, superheroes for the most part. That stuff appeal to you? What led you to sci-fi? I've just asked 5 questions in one.
It's all right. Superheroes did not unlock my creativity the way that sci-fi did. That's a simple way to kind of, blanket answer that thought that you went through just now, that we all watched you go through. No,
but, painfully listened to. He's losing his mind.
I think everybody who listens to podcasts understands how those things get built. It's like an essay question,
I'm listening to somebody not being able to speak English. And how much of an influence was because I think of Sacramento, and I've spent time in Sacramento. I think it's very similar to Austin, where I grew up, and it has that alternative scene. It's got a rock and roll scene. It's obviously got the college and the Capitol, so it's got a kind of a vibrant political scene coming out of the colleges and being right there. It feels kind of like Austin. And then you got San Francisco, which we all know how like San Francisco is. It's got crazy ideas and lots of progressive and all that. How influential were those scenes to you as an artist or just as a person, storyteller?
Huge. I think scenes in general, I think, have been a huge influence on me, like whether it was the rave scene or the underground comics scene or, the indie artist scene that I guess I'm in now, because I'm not working for major companies. Even if I am working professionally for some publishers, it's not DC or Marvel or even Image at this point. And I think that there's always kind of an embedded culture in those individual scenes, and like that underground mentality. I mean, underground music is such a vibrant scene, and it's such a better show usually than going to some mass marketed giant artist at a giant venue, right? Like the Elton John tour that just went around, I saw that at a way too big of a venue, and it was terrible. The sound was so awful that I couldn't even enjoy it. Obviously, the performance was good, but I could not tell you based on what I heard. You know what I mean? So I think that all the experiences that I've had, whether it be in front of a DJ or at a coffee shop, a comics art show, or a zine fest, or the Alternative Press Expo, like smaller level stuff, those are usually the most vibrant and creativity packed experiences that I've ever had. So I think I flock to that, and Sacramento definitely, when I lived there, was it had an element of that, but I did not feel that it is what it has become, which now it seems very vibrant. I really like the cultural energy that I'm getting from it. I still have a lot of friends who live there and who are artists there, and they're thriving because it's really boomed. The downtown area has been really developed since I left. I left there in 2004, so it's been a long time. And subsequently went to San Francisco, and that's like a merger of the indie scene and then like the best design in the world, and you have like a huge Asian influence, and there's a big corporate influence there, which it doesn't always register when you think of it, but then once you live there, you're like, oh yeah, this is like a big business town. So there's the shiny side of it, and then there's the crunchy side of it, you know what I mean? And like both of those had their definite effect. And I think like San Francisco pushed me further away from superheroes because it's an intellectually challenging place, and it's like a can opener for your consciousness, to be around all these different ideas and all these different types of people, whether it's like a guy who is shooting heroin on the street and singing opera tunes, who's a real homeless guy in my neighborhood, an unhoused guy, that everybody makes friends with, though, right? He's like an entrenched part of the neighborhood, so he's actually not looked down upon. Everybody does their best to help him and not make it a bad situation. It's a good situation. There's everything from that to like former Mayor Willie Brown being the guy I have to serve wine to at my bartending job and get treated like shit by him because of his position, right? So you get every end of the spectrum there, and there's the best food and wine and art shows, and all the best acts come through as far as comedy or musical performances and things like that. So you just like, there's so much to dump into your brain there.
But you had to compete, because you're an indie comics creator and people have limited budgets, or if they're going to be putting their money towards indie comics, and it takes it's not like the Marvel and DC, which are made they're made by these giant conglomerates and giant companies that can promote and this and that. You really have to carve out, as an indie comic creator, you have to really carve out your niche. You have to carve out your audience, and you're competing against other indie comic creators because they're not just your collaborators, they're not just like your peer group, but you're trying to sell your book over theirs or in addition to theirs. Who was that crowd, and like how did you cut your teeth is really the story I'd love to hear. Is who was influential on you and who showed you the ropes in this?
Well, I always, not to repeat anything I've said on other shows,
Sure.
but Larry Young was a big person. The guy, he wrote AIT, Astronauts in Trouble, and he runs the company AIT Planet Lar and is a fixture at Comic Con every year in San Diego, and is sort of known for having some wisdom about self-publishing because he went from just, having an advertising job to having a great, self-started small press, which was technically self-publishing, and wrote a great series of articles on his blog, or the Comics Experience blog. I can't remember where this originated, but it became a book called True Facts. And that book was hugely influential. And I still read it. I've read it like 10 times and have forced other people to read it because it's just the quintessential thing of like, no, comics are a product. I realize it's precious to you, but actually comics are a product like anything else. And the comics marketplace is a literature or retail marketplace like any other. Treat it as such. Treat the commodity as a commodity because that's what that is once it's printed on paper, whether you love your idea and are in a passionate relationship with it or not. It's sort of irrelevant to the business side of it. Like, let's talk about the business side. And it's a really simple, like I said, it's just 23 blog posts that are stitched into a book. So it's just this, pencil thin book. But I mean, it was like the manual along with like Comics and Sequential Art by Will Eisner and Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. Like those were huge. I did a lot of stuff, honestly, based on the inspiration of going to conventions and being, a teenager in the image boom when Image was created and seeing that these artists split off from this quote unquote big paycheck, which ultimately is a myth that's been kind of dispelled. Like they weren't making a ton of money at Marvel. It's one of the reasons they walked. And I think I was inspired in ways that I didn't fully understand until this phase of my life, to be honest with you, by the entrepreneurial side of all that stuff. But when I moved to San Francisco, I was fortunate to just kind of stumble into this scene where Larry Young was part of the group. And I guess this is probably because I went to an alternative press expo with the first book that I ever self-published called Moth Spy. And I took it with me to APE and handed out a bunch of copies, and I made some great connections that are friends to this day, people, that I actually have collaborated with. And, it was a very warm, embracing environment. And when I decided to move there, like within 6 months of publishing that book in 2004, primarily to go to art school, I stumbled into the Isotope Comics Lounge hangout crew, which was, it's still to this day a pretty great crew to be in. Like James, who runs that store, is one of the ultimate comic fans I've ever met in my entire life. And it's also such a punk rock fan experience that has, after hours events and serves cocktails and really caters to the community and culture side of comics, less than the continuity of comics, which to me is another thing that pushed me away from superheroes. Is like, I don't care about the continuity as much as I love some story arcs. They're awesome, but I hated being chained to the continuity, especially when the story arc got stupid. In between the 2 or 3 great story arcs in a year, there were always the filler story arcs.
Wait, 2 or 3? There might be one every 2 or 3 years. I mean, I still read weekly, monthly comics. I still do. And
I applaud you for that, by the way.
I mean, I make these TikTok videos where I talk about what I'm buying, and I really only say a couple blurbs about the ones that I know what's going on, because sometimes they just go in one ear, out the other. But I still love comics. And talking about the image boom, the one podcast that's kind of pop culture comics related that I listen to every week is Rob Liefeld's. Rob is somebody I met when I was, I mean, obviously, Rob Liefeld. My first job was in a comic store in high school. And that was during the image boom. I mean, I started working in 94, I guess, 95. And that's when the image explosion was really happening. And those guys were rock stars. And Rob Liefeld was on a Levi's commercial and all that stuff. And Rob's podcast, and I've asked Rob to be on the podcast, but I've only really had him on panels as a moderated conversation with him. And honestly, Rob was one of the first people to congratulate me after Heidi and I's proposal. I saw Rob and his wife backstage, and he's like, "Oh man, it's so great." He's always enthused. He's the most excited guy. And I'll tell you, think what you will about Rob Liefeld as a creator, no one loves comics more than Rob Liefeld. Like, nobody has a passion for comics like Rob Liefeld, like just a pure passion. And I love his podcast because he talks about them so passionately and relentlessly, and he keeps receipts. He'll pull out old images, old Wizard comics or old interviews, or he'll bring out sales charts and he'll show you what comics sold and what the image boom looked like, and how they influenced Marvel, or the Heroes Reborn when he and Jim Lee came back to do some of the major Marvel characters there for a year, right as Marvel was filing for bankruptcy in 1996, 7. And he'll show you the numbers of like what Captain America was doing before he was on the book, ranked 97th or something like that overall. And then when he did the book, and it suddenly ranked like 4th or 6th and that kind of thing. And that's what I love about his show, is that he's like, I don't care, I'm bringing out receipts. This is what really happened and stuff like that. And it's been really fun to listen to. So Geekscape is, after you listen to this, then you listen to Earl Afey, then you listen to Rob Liefeld's podcast. And Rob, come on the show whenever you can. I'll see him at a convention. I'll be like, "Hey Rob, please come on Geekscape. It'll be fun." But that's all superhero talk. That's that kind of stuff. And some of it does come down to gossip.
And let me mea culpa a little bit, because like I'm just very picky about what I read when it comes to superhero
You have limited
comics,
time.
especially, I think.
Dude,
I have limited time.
You don't have to say that. You have limited time. And a lot of this stuff is absolutely not like memorable. And it's soap opera. And I don't want to be dismissive of too much of an art form, because some comic is somebody's favorite comic, right? Like, like people are like, "Hey Jonathan, what was one of your favorite comics as a kid?" And I'm going to say it's the Avengers annual that dealt with Evolutionary War. And it's a cover of the High Evolutionary holding a globe, in like, Beast is hanging off of it, and Hercules is on the team, and I think Photon's on the team. And like, it's not probably a great issue, but as a kid, I loved it. It's probably completely disposable. And I have a tattered version of it. I still have my version of it, totally tattered. But that was my favorite comic. And to say that this stuff is too dismissible, is too dismissible, is not doing credit to it. But for the most part, as a middle-aged dude looking back at this, not all of them go over the fence, man.
No. And that's all I mean, because there are things like the Arthur Adams doing the X Babies or whatever. There's things that I will never let go of, because I think I'll pry them out of my dead hands when I'm a
so
kid,
much
when
fun.
I'm dead. But like it's just the overall. I cannot keep up with all that continuity, especially once I discovered European comics and retro sci-fi comics and all the Kickstarter stuff that's coming out now, or just indie books that I get from someone's table at a convention. You know, there's all these different markets for comics. There's like 3 main markets for comics now. You know, you got your shop, you got your cons, and you got your crowdfunding platforms. And like never the twain shall meet sometimes. There's whole spectrums of comic books that never see the inside of a shop, but they sell, you know, however many copies they sell on a crowdfunding campaign. And if you happen to get one of those and there's no editorial oversight per se, other than the creator themselves, you never know where it's going to go. And then like, once I discovered some of the amazing stuff that people can pump out unchecked when they're in their like zone of inspiration or whatever, you know, it was hard to go back to superheroes because there's a lot of repetition in superheroes. And it's not that I never
by design
read superheroes. It's just that, you know, it's pretty hard to get me to do it because I don't read that many comics in general. I'm usually just so busy drawing comics at this point that I don't read nearly as many as I want to anyway. So
I find the same thing with filmmaking. I just don't see enough movies or watch enough TV. And then I'm constantly writing, or I'm constantly filming, or I'm constantly doing this filmmaking stuff. And I sometimes get like this complex and say, dude, are you seeing enough? Like the Oscars get announced and I'm like, I haven't watched a fourth of these movies.
You're like, I've seen two or three of those. Yeah.
Like, do I need to? And then the other morning, I just sat down and I watched all of Once Upon a Time in the West. And I was like, no, I don't need to see any of those movies because this is one of the greatest films ever made. And it reminds you of all of the things that are important in this form, in this art form. And it's a pretty damn good barometer, man. Stick to this stuff. So again, we're talking about stuff where, but the cream rises to the top, but some of it, even the stuff that you may not love, is somebody's favorite. Jackknife is on YouTube, and he says, when I bought X-Force #1, I dreamt of what it would be like, what would it be worth financially in 30 years. That happened in 2021. It was 30 years old. I don't care if it didn't go up in value. I still love those memories. And I think those memories, Jackknife, are the most valuable part of it, right? Like, how many people have that Spawn #1? You know what I mean? Like, there we go. Jackknife also says, I'm sorry, honey, I can't watch movies right now. I'm too busy writing incel bot dialogue. Oh God, I love that. I would love to bring, don't say incel bot's name 3 times. He'll show up and ruin the show. That'd be fun.
Over my shoulder.
So Kraig, I'm looking at your artwork, and I think when you talk about European influences, obviously as like a complete pedestrian myself, you got to talk about Mobius. You got to talk about some of these creators who appear to be influences on you. Talk about if the Geekscapists are listening to this and they're like, hey, I want to check out Kraig's work, but I also want to check out his influences, because Geekscapists, you got to go to monkeygong.com to see Kraig's work. But if you want to see some of the things that influenced him, where would you send them? Like, who are some of the creators that you said, this really educated the way I draw, or the way I look at the stories?
I mean, certainly Mobius, I have to just absolutely claim that in the last 10 years or so, he has had the biggest influence on me. But I also, have always been a huge fan of Barry Windsor Smith and Paul Pope. Like, those are two very different artists, really, if you look at their work. But at their core, they're very serious, rigorous artists, And Barry Windsor Smith has that very classical edge, which I think I aspire to, whether I like it or not, honestly. Sometimes I wish I was cartoony and had just more fun drawing my stuff when I see a lot of the stuff my friends draw that's really kinetic.
But I see the Paul Pope stuff in here as well.
Yeah. So Paul Pope taught me how to ink, because he's just absolutely fearless with ink. And I'm definitely, I would not describe myself as fearless with ink. I'm, because I'm looking for something kind of tight. It can be a very high pressure situation sometimes, unless I'm doing it a lot. And that's been part of the productivity for me lately, is that I just forced myself last year to just start inking everything that I could possibly ink and stop sitting back on it. Because, I'm never going to get through the fear of inking, without, I don't know if I can curse, but,
you go for it. But Kraig, when you talk inking, you're not on like a tablet. This is real. Like, if I fuck this up, I've just ruined my pencils. Is that correct?
Not that extreme. That's how I used to think of it. And I have a great friendship with an artist named Mike Dubish, who does amazing work. Has a book called Forbidden Futures, if you're interested. And to be frank, having somebody that talented as a friend that lived close by me and I could hang out with him a couple days a week, here in Phoenix for several years until he moved away not too long ago. It was instrumental, I think, in really focusing in on how to do the thing and not get caught up in things like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get these inks the way I want them, and I might fuck up the story or fuck up the pencils or whatever. And I watch Mike and he
just waste your time and say,
I
lost the plot. The thread got away from me. I got to refigure out what this tone has to be.
So I would watch him with stacks of pages, burn through pages as far as his output, but then he'd also be ruthless in making sure that they would get where they needed to be. So he'd do paste ups, he'd do massive amounts of whiteout. And there, I had portfolio critiques at conventions many times in the past where it's like, oh, awful lot of white. Like you'd be kind of, looked down upon for using too much whiteout. But it's like, who cares? Because if you look at like an artist edition, like an Al Williamson artist edition, there's fucking whiteout everywhere. It's about trying to get the best possible version of that image on paper and the story at the same time. So that is what you need to focus on. Who cares how you get there? And that's, I'll never talk down to somebody who's doing something digitally versus by, hand traditionally. Like that's a thing that I think I have looked down on in the past when it was early, when it was still super digital, but now people can achieve results that look like they just used an ink brush on paper and it's completely organic, and it's its own thing, because when it really comes down to it, it's about a person made this. It doesn't really matter what tools they used to get there. It doesn't really matter what the process was, unless it's AI art.
That's what I was about to say. I was like, careful there, buddy. Because two episodes ago, you heard me talking to Tom about AI and ripping off your signatures and things like that. And I love that you brought up Al Williamson, especially as a sci-fi fan, because I think Al Williamson, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he did the definitive story that takes place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. Do you remember these things, these newspaper strips? Am I talking about the right Al Williamson here?
Yeah, that's Al.
Like he did the newspaper strips that were the bridge between, and Dark Horse republished them back in the early 90s. You may still be able to find them.
Classics.
The Star Wars classics, and they were reprints of the Al Williamson stories that took place after A New Hope. It wasn't called New Hope at the time. It was still called Star Wars. And before Empire Strikes Back. And you find, and it's bounty hunters coming after Han Solo. And Han Solo sticking to the same guns that he has at the beginning of Empire, where he's like, hey, this is all cool running around the galaxy with y'all, but I got to go pay off this Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah.
And he's sending bounty hunters after him. Meanwhile, Leia and Luke are looking for a place to put a new base for the rebels. And the rebels are kind of like destitute. They're out, they're trying to just planet hop while they find a base, and the storyline starts to end when they find Hoth and they establish the rebel base on Hoth, which is where Empire Strikes Back is. As a story taking place between New Hope and Empire, I think it's awesome. And Al Williamson gives it the right kind of Flash Gordon 50s feel that I thought was the main influence for George Lucas when he made, Star Wars. It just feels great. I don't know. I mean, some of this newer stuff, no offense, Marvel, no offense, even Dark Horse, some of this extended universe stuff, some of that stuff just doesn't feel that same. You got to have a little bit of Buck Rogers, a little bit of 70s style in your Star Wars still. It can't get too glossy. And you were talking about
why Andor worked a little bit better.
Yeah.
I think the creator is a little bit older. He's like in our age bracket, so he's familiar with all those retro influences, and he knew how to do the lived-in sci-fi thing while still making it feel like retro science fiction from Earth.
Those first 3 episodes, I think those first 3 episodes of Andor are incredible, and obviously the first. Some of those episodes of Mandalorian, you're just like, this is it. They got it. They got the used universe. They got it. They know what the tone is. But when I saw Andor in those opening scenes walk in to, it's like a super future strip club, looking for his sister who he hadn't seen since they were kids, and he's got a goal. Right off the bat, you know who this character is. He's got a goal. He's trying to find this family member. And they weren't afraid of going into like a seedy part of it, right? Like, let's remember, Han Solo is a drug smuggler, and he hangs out in Mos Eisley, and it's where scumbags hang out. And there was always that seedy part of Star Wars, the underbelly, the crime part of Star Wars. And Andor, in the first scene, went right at it, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is not only lived in, this is nasty. And
I mean, the
this
follow-up
is
scene,
cool.
he straight up just puts those two guys down, and that's the beginning of everything. And it's just like, okay, yeah, okay, I know where I am right now in this story, you know. And when I watched it through the second time, I watched it through right after it ended, watched it in a very short period of time, and it's so tight. The whole show feels like that, you know, where you're just in that original Star Wars area, like, of fiction. You can feel it in every ounce of texture, and like, I don't know, it just is very satisfying when that ball gets hit over the fence, as you said earlier. And I do feel like there's a little bit of like what everybody feared, having Disney take over. I feel like a little bit of that is happening. You know, it is a little bit safe sometimes, and you know, it's resulting in like the Boba Fett show being like, it just didn't feel like this character that we all knew. Whether, you know, I understand the comments that not Pablo Hidalgo, the other guy, what's his name?
Well, the Mandalorian kind of gave you the Boba Fett show, and I don't know what they could have done that the Mandalorian wasn't already doing, because he was doing a lot of ruthless Boba Fett style stuff when you start Mandalorian, and you can't kind of have them. You can't have them both checking those boxes. You got to shade the characters from each other in a sense. It just wasn't maybe the stuff that we wanted. But the point that I would make is, when you look at Star Wars, there's a Star, like comic books, like we talk about comic books. There's a Star Wars for everybody. There's stuff for the kids. There's stuff for the older people like you and I. And earlier you were talking about the revisionism that your revisionism doesn't sound like a nice term. You're talking about the going back and being able to rework some of the things you weren't happy with the first time out. And Geekscape, is we're talking about this these two books, Odds and Ends 1, Odds and Ends 2, that you can find up on Kraig's website that he's crowdfunding right now. And you can just, I'm not going to call it crowdfunding, order these books. Just go and order these books. Kraig is going back and he's finding earlier artwork. In some instances, he's going and correcting them. Lucas did do the same thing with the special editions, but did you hear the story that I found out about the special editions? And some of it was financially driven, right? His ex-wife edited that first Star Wars movie that turned out to be A New Hope, and she even won an Oscar for it, right? He was paying royalties through Fox, who published the movie. He had to pay his ex-wife royalties. Obviously, he had a child with her, and he had to pay like parental support. But George Lucas looks up, and he's paying royalties on Star Wars, the most profitable movie of all time when it came out, and continued to be top 5, you know, tops all through the 90s. And he's paying royalties to her because she was the Academy Award winning editor on that first Star Wars film. But he found out that, and we're going to have to check the legalese on this, but this is what I hear, that if he went and recut the special edition and added, he cut them into special edition. He recut Star Wars, adds the Jabba stuff, adds the CGI stuff, adds some scenes, that he's actually gone through a process of remediation with that content that he owns.
Really?
And now because it was now a Lucasfilm property, in the special editions through Lucasfilm as distributor do not have to pay royalties, which is why we will never get the original Star Wars cuts on Blu-ray or on streaming, because in doing so, he would have to pay royalties back out. And to avoid those royalties, supposedly, George, come on the show, talk to us about it. I heard everybody I know who's met you says you're amazing. But as a business decision to stop paying royalties, you recut the movie and negated those royalty.
I mean, that sounds as shrewd as many of the decisions that he made with the original trilogy, to be honest. You know, because there's the whole thing with
Gary Kurtz,
the producer, Gary Kurtz, who basically is like, the minute it became about toys, I was out, and he is very adamant about that in the middle of Empire. Yeah, George made the decision somewhere during that movie, and that he was like, "Oh, great."
There's an argument to be made. I mean, no offense, all of you who love the sequels and prequels and everything in between, and we've obviously just lauded praise onto Andor and Mandalorian and that, and I'm excited. I see every Star Wars thing ever like first day, but there's an argument to be made when my two favorite Star Wars movies are New Hope and Empire, and Gary Kurtz was a big part of both those movies. He seemed to have a kind of a finger on the pulse, some of that stuff.
But I will say this, that sometimes,
Craig, I know you love Caravan
there's another
Courage.
audience.
I'm not taking Caravan of Courage away from you.
Okay. You're right.
Yes.
How did you know?
No.
How did you know I was going there? Is it because I have the full size poster behind me on the wall? No, the
tattoo is
when I was a kid, though, Empire Return of the Jedi totally grabbed my attention. Granted, I think it was the only one I saw in the theater as a kid because I was too young when the second one came out, not born when the first one came out. So I think that maybe it could have just been that factor, but I loved that movie with all of my heart. And I guarantee you that it is at the core of my science fiction vision and interest, being one of the first movies that ever really caught my attention. And, this has been said about the prequels. I've had this argument with my friend Mike, who I brought up a minute ago, many times, is that the prequels aren't for us. They're for the generation that we were when the first, movies hit us when we were really young in the 80s.
And they can have them.
But they love them.
Yes,
but they love them. And that's the whole thing, is that those movies hit them exactly how George wanted them to hit. And I think that in some ways, maybe he had a little bit of foresight with the things like that he did for Return of the Jedi, because it was originally Wookiees, got turned into Ewoks, and it got tamed down a little bit, and the comedy was pumped up a little bit. And like, maybe he was on to something on a business level. I totally understand. I do think creatively that maybe he changed his mind about a certain direction that he was heading that we kind of prefer, right? And that maybe Tony Gilroy prefers, and that's why he wrote Andor that way. But whatever. I mean, this has obviously been spoken of. This is a corner of the internet itself, is this Star Wars conversation.
You're like, why do I go to Geekscape for this? I can just read this blog. I can just go on Twitter. The nerds
can't be surprised. You can't be surprised if you're on a show called Geekscape and this is something that comes up.
So. If anything, geeks, I think y'all are happy with the conversation. Reward Craig for bringing the nerd to us, and go over to that monkeygong.com and find your way over to the Zoop. Let me pull it up here on the site. Geekscape. So I'm just going to talk to you real quick. We talked briefly about the Zoop fundraiser, or really this is almost, we had our friend Tom on the show, and he had his comic sold through Zoop. And tell me about this Zoop thing, and why not just do a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo? Like, what's the story on Zoop, and why, as a comic creator, why would you use Zoop over the other crowdfunding sites?
Well, I mean, primarily it's comics only. So that was one of the first things that attracted me to it. They've had a number of high-level creators put their books out through the platform. And
what are some names, if you can recall?
Dan Panosian, Jay Gonzo, the Jean Paul Leon Wintermen written by Brett Lewis. Tony Harris just had a campaign wrap up. Nick Pitara and Axe Wielder John, his Barbarian book, recently funded through there, in a very, very exciting campaign. And watching the flexibility of Nick's campaign in particular, he kept adding stretch goals because he was doing really well. So he kept adding really interesting things that, honestly, if I had the heat on my campaign that he had on his, I would probably be trying one of the similar things that he did, which was like, he was doing so well that he said, okay, if I just get this much more funding on this stretch goal, I will bring this cartoonist I like, or illustrator that I really like, out of retirement to draw a backup story for my book. Yeah. Like, just so he brought this Italian artist or whatever. Yeah. It was super cool. And watching that happen, I was like, I like this flexibility. I mean, maybe it'd be possible through Kickstarter, but I have a feeling that the other element about Zoop that I like, that I'm going to get to, made this possible, which is the personal touch that Jordan and Eric, the owners and founders, have on everything, and the fact that they're kind of entrenched part of the comic book community. Eric is from IDW originally, and Jordan, I'm not sure if he actually worked in comics prior to this, but he has been a fixture at Comic-Con for the last 10 years easily. I've known him for at least that long. So, and forgive me, Jordan, for not knowing what your resume was prior to Zoop, but basically they were invested in this idea a long time before it it launched. And I think the pandemic helped them push it off the ground because crowdfunding took off during that. I mean, as did just sales of comics in general. The pandemic was frankly kind of good for comics in a way, which is a weird thing to say about anything that was good that came out of the pandemic.
Sure.
But once I saw other creators really enjoy their experience with Zoop and looked at some of the back end benefits and had this personal connection, especially once Eric approached me at Comic Con and last summer, there was just something about it that made it easier to wrap my head around than doing a Kickstarter, which seemed like this faceless thing that
it all scares me, Craig.
Endlessly read a bunch of details and just get lost and not really, have the creative edge. It scared the hell out of me too, frankly. So I feel really fortunate the way the campaign's going. I feel like my audience and family and friends really stepped up and surprised me. And like, I'm really, really excited to try and push it further as we have a couple weeks left. But ultimately, I just think watching this become an addition to the comics community specifically, not that Kickstarter isn't, but Kickstarter isn't necessarily interested or invested in the community.
This is the watering hole. This is the watering hole where the comic fans come to drink, and knowing that you're not going to have it diluted by someone doing a tabletop game or someone doing an indie film or something like that's all good. That's Kickstarter. But if you really want the concentrated eyeballs and attention of somebody who is here for the comics and they want to come back to comics, like, this is appealing to me. Like, I went through the pandemic and we were developing a cartoon and I have all these scripts for it. And I love these scripts. I love the characters. I have so much fun with them. A friend of mine just read them and he's like, what is going on with this? This is great. And I said, it's a cartoon, man. Like, I'm not a cartoonist. I was coming off the heat of some other stuff and it just didn't make it through the finish line. Like, it's still mine. And a part of me is like, is this an indie comic? I talked to somebody yesterday on the floor of Pasadena Comic Con who does full service. If you come to him with a comic book idea for X amount of money per page, he'll be able to put your comic book together. And they're pretty high quality comics and they went to print. I don't know how much of an online presence they have because they lack something like a campaign on Zoop or something like that, where you're engendering your product of fans. You're building this momentum or this community that I think is really important. Otherwise, you have this printed book and you got to sell them one at a time rather than have a community collectively doing a little bit of word of mouth for you, especially with like a month-long campaign, however long these are. I think there's a strategy to this stuff, and you still get the printed comic as you do in your reward. So I'm looking at this Zoop thing. I'm taking notes, Craig. Taking notes. Maybe we bring those scripts out and turn them into comics. I don't know.
I approve.
And we saw each other we didn't actually run into each other at LA Comic Con, but you were there. Listen, if you see me at a con, just come up and grab food.
I had the eyeline, but the thing is, I had just gotten over COVID.
I got over COVID. Give me COVID. I got back to my computer, Geekscape, to check my phone, and Craig's like, "Hey, I saw you on stage," and I'm like, "Dude, I would have come over to your booth. I would have found you. What a jerk I turned out to be. I would have loved to come and say hi in person."
No, I mean, I was so happy for you. I'm like, oh my God, who is he talking to? He's talking to LeVar Burton right now. Like, I had this like line of sight from my booth, which was literally across the entire con from where you were. That's why I didn't even like make myself known
annoying.
To you. Next time
I'll wear a bag on my head.
I could see you small, and then above you, I could see you on the screen with LeVar Burton, and I think I forget who else you were on the main stage with. But basically, I was like, that's my friend. I was talking to LeVar Burton right now. Look right there, So I had a good time watching you have a good time and having a successful show. So that was enough for me. And frankly, I had just gotten over COVID, so I was a wreck. Like, I was barely on my feet. I was like, I'm going back to the hotel right at 7 p.m. You guys, I'll see you in a little bit for dinner after I have quiet time. So it was,
Craig, is like WonderCon something that might be in your future, or maybe San Diego?
San Diego for sure. WonderCon, no, because I have not made any moves toward WonderCon. Sure. It just hasn't really been that good of a show for me for some reason.
We don't exhibit
every show
anymore.
Possible.
No offense, Comic Con or International. We clearly go to San Diego, but WonderCon we stopped exhibiting shortly after they left San Francisco, and it was weird. Like I love WonderCon. It's a cool con. It's just within if it's like within an hour or two drive home, it's like frustrating just going back and forth, and it's like, does it justify whatever? Does it justify a hotel? Does it not? You sleep in your own bed? Who knows? Whatever. Yeah. But I have fun for a day at WonderCon. Maybe we'll be there with panels, but San Diego for sure. And then our friend Mike does the conventions there in Tucson and in Phoenix. What is his name? Mike, I'm so sorry. His wife Teresa is really hilarious, and he actually does. Brian Polito's his business partner on some of those cons there in Phoenix. Mike's been wanting me to come out and say hi.
Is Mike an artist?
Mike makes vinyl kaiju figures. Geekscape is how into the nerd weeds are we now? I should introduce you because he and Brian Polito run those cons in Tucson and stuff, and he's always wanted me to come out and maybe moderate or something, but I'd love it. I'd love it.
Pretty good show. I mean, Tucson was a weird show. My dad passed away the first day of the con, so it was like being there
this
just
year?
with this year. So I was just like frozen faced. I'm sure I wasn't that great of a salesperson, and not to bring it down.
That's back in Sacramento where your father was.
He was in Folsom outside of Sacramento. Yeah.
So I've been there.
He had a long battle with Alzheimer's, and it was sort of a relief for him, I'm sure, in body, and hopefully in spirit. So, but it was weird energy to do a convention under. So, but I thought Tucson was a good little show. It's like you're saying about Pasadena. It's like a nice small town show, but it's actually really into the experience, and everybody who was there was so happy to be there. And that's the general energy I've been getting from conventions in the last year. So.
Geekscape is
evasive about the dad thing.
Geekscape is don't skip this stuff. Don't skip the smaller cons. Don't skip the smaller film festivals. You filmmakers out there, and obviously, if you're a video game person, things like Indiecade and these independent, developer conventions and things like that. Those are always there, and they give you a chance to go up to people like Kraig or creators and meet them. And maybe Kraig was avoiding me at LA Comic Con, but we're not going to make the same mistake at San Diego. I'm going to hunt you. I'm going to hunt you like Craven the Hunter.
I will find you.
I'm going to find you. You know how you just wanted to like wear Spider-Man's skin or something like that? You wanted to wear like the Spider-Man suit, like Craven wanted to become Spider-Man? That's how I'm going to do it with Kraig. Except you're going to be like, Kraig's artwork just went to crap. That's what I'm wearing his skin. This got really creepy. Kraig, one last time, I want to tell the Geekscape is check out Monkeygong.com. Look for Kraig on social media, and dude, Kraig, you kind of sent me a message like right after LA Comic Con. I was like, hey, I've got this Zoop thing. I'd love to come on the show. I'm glad I have you on, man. It's great talking comics. I love comics.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it,
dude. Of course. Good luck on the rest of the campaign. Geekscape is, where to check it out. We've pimped it. Monkeygong.com. As for Geekscape, well, I'm pretty sure we're going to be here next week. We've been here for 15, 16 years. I've got some cool guests coming up. We're going into some filmmaking coming up as far as guests go. We're going to have some directors on, some actors, maybe some familiar faces. And we all, if you don't find what you're looking for here on Geekscape, we've got a whole network of shows, everything from music to retro to 80s stuff. That was retro to filmmaking. We got anything to scratch your itch in the geek space because it's Geekscape. You just search for us on any podcatcher and it's always free. So Geekscape, I love you. Hang out with us over on Geekscape Forever on Facebook. Just search for Geekscape wherever you find us. That's where you belong because you're a part of this. Love you. Thank you so much for sharing this past hour with us, listeners, and Kraig. And we'll talk to you next week. Thanks a lot, Kraig.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Great talking to you.